Hi, and welcome to another classical music podcast from the Kirov Academy. My guest today is one of my oldest friends. I never like to say oldest friends because it connotes age, but somebody that I've known for the majority of my professional life. A wonderful violinist, a member of the National Opera, and an all-around epic storyteller. Please welcome Zino Bogachek. Zorik, привет. I think
Hello, Emil.
the first question as I'm introducing you, the first question that I have is the actual official name of the orchestra of which you are a member. Is it the Kennedy Center Opera House Orchestra?
Well, that's a great question. Actually, we have two official names. When we play for the Washington National Opera, we are called Washington National Opera Orchestra. And our orchestra also plays for the ballets. And that's when we are called
The Kennedy
Kennedy
Center
Center
Opera
Opera
House
House
Orchestra.
Orchestra. And also when you see, we do all sorts of stuff. We play opera, ballet, and musical theater. When it comes to town, ranging from, Hello Dolly to Hamilton. And so that's why two names.
It's the orchestra in residence, you might say, right?
Well, yeah, you might say so.
Right. And for I should also start for you to give you an idea of the kind of viewership that these podcasts have, the kind of people at whom they're aimed, so that you know what to assume people know and what to realize that people don't know.
Great.
A lot of the viewers will be students of Kirov, prospective students at Kirov, their parents, um, people who may not have a lot of connections to and expertise with the musical world. So certain things like what an orchestra in residence is and what your weekly schedule is like, those kind of things are vital to know, of course, but you can't assume that people know them.
Right.
So
Well,
I should.
so the long story is that at the Kennedy Center we have two orchestras. One of which is National Symphony Orchestra, and the other one is our orchestra, which has two names.
And the National Symphony's sort of job description is the symphonic concerts, the things that do not have a ballet associated with them or a musical or an opera, like you were saying. Yours is the one that plays in the different theater at the Kennedy Center,
Yes.
where
Yes, we play mainly at the Opera House and Eisenhower Theater. Sometimes, not very often, we do smaller production at the Terrace Theater,
right.
which is upstairs. But
But
our
I think I
main,
remember the last time that I saw you in action, as it were, was when my wife and I came to see chess.
right? Yes,
Right.
yes,
And right before then, I think the last time that we had managed to make it out was for the staging of Magic Flute.
right. Yes, you're correct.
Two very, very different shows and two very, very different demands upon the
Well,
orchestra.
that's in our job description. That's what we do.
Precisely. So let me start there. Let me ask you, for example, when you have an opera playing at the Kennedy Center, does that mean that no musical will be playing at the same time? It's sequential. It's not contemporaneous.
Well, it could be two different productions running at the same time, but if the opera is playing at the Opera House, then the musical would be playing at the Eisenhower Theater.
So if it's a smaller musical, let's say, and
Yes.
and do the same musicians play in both shows?
Well, it depends on the situation. If we are playing the smaller opera, one of the operas that require less musicians, such as Mozart's opera or Rossini, then the rest of us would be playing the
In the
musical next
Eisenhower.
door. But if we are playing one of the bigger, works like something that's written by Richard Strauss or Wagner, uh, then outside musicians would be hired
For the
for
musical.
the musical work. Yeah.
Right. It's one of those things that I don't know if people recognize the logistical tasks for the administration to make sure that when you are programming an entire year, to try and avoid such conflicts, to try and avoid such it's not just what do people want to hear; it's what forces are involved.
Right. I think for the management of the Kennedy Center, it's kind of a logistical nightmare, because they have what, 6, 7 theaters in that building, and to make sure that it all runs smoothly, I can't even start comprehending how
No,
does it work.
I think
I'm glad.
everybody
I don't
has.
work at the management.
Everyone has special skills. Sometimes I'm sure you've had people thank you for playing at a memorial, or for something that you have been individually asked to do. I remember once being complimented on playing Czardas as an encore after playing a Paganini concerto, and like, oh my gosh, how could you do that? I'm like, first I played Paganini, Czardas was nothing. But for somebody for whom every piece, of course, needs to be learned painstakingly, that was a big thing. For you and me, we don't have these, gears in our brains to work out the logistics. And for us, it's magic. How do you juggle 6 theaters, 2 major orchestras, a full opera company? How do you, the stagehands, how do you not have utter chaos? Right?
Yeah, especially when you talk about stagehands, as an orchestra musician, you have to be very good friends with 3 kinds of people. Number one is ushers. Number two, it's librarians. And number three is stagehands. Not necessarily in that order.
But explain why.
But these people are absolutely vital to the performance, and people don't realize how vital they are. Just to give you a quick example, when we were playing the Ring Cycle, we had quite a few rehearsals at the concert hall of the Kennedy Center. That's where a National Symphony usually plays, and they were on break, and we had our rehearsals there. And
was there a reason, by the way, why your rehearsals were in a different theater than the one where the staging would be?
That I never found out, but I guess, well, number one, the sound was better than in our rehearsal room. We use so-called rehearsal room number 4, which is probably the biggest rehearsal room at the Kennedy Center. But still, when you put full Wagnerian orchestra in there, it's just loud. It's just difficult on your ears, and since the operas are so long, it becomes difficult for your kind of general health condition.
your psychic health, yeah.
Yeah, so just to give you a quick example, a totally different team of stagehands works at the concert hall. And sometimes I play as a guest musician with the National Symphony Orchestra when I'm off my season in the Opera House Orchestra. And at the National Symphony Orchestra, they have 2 different sets of chairs. Let's name it chair number 1 and chair number 2. And for an orchestra musician, it's very important what kind of chair you use, because of the angle of the seat, because of the angle of the back of the chair, because of the ability to adjust the height of the legs of the chair. And when I'm playing with the NSO, I use chair number 2. And when our orchestra came to rehearse to the National Symphony place of rehearsal, I realized that for my seat, for where I sit, the stagehand put in the chair that I usually use for the National Symphony Orchestra. That was such a nice, beautiful touch,
When you're sitting there for rehearsing a 5-hour-long opera, and that's not an exaggeration, I should point out.
Yes, it's actually longer, some of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, the rehearsal, I don't know how one rehearses. We should talk about that too. How does one rehearse a 5-hour opera in 3 hours? I'm assuming that the rehearsals are, the lengths of the rehearsals are union determined. But before I get into that, let me backtrack to the ushers and the librarians. Why do you need to be friends with them?
Well, librarians are very important in the sense that, let's say, when you're receiving your practice copy, usually you receive your practice copy of the opera you're about to play a month in advance, sometimes 2 months in advance. And although maybe I'll be totally off the line here, but I'll say that not all the practice copies are created equally. And I get the best practice copy.
Again, for the parents and students, I should point out I have gotten some of the not best practice copies, and among the things that you deal with is that the bowings are completely messed up, and you come to the first rehearsal and you look and feel like an idiot because everybody's doing the same bowings except for you. And why are you doing different ones? Because you've been practicing messed up bowings for the past month. Maybe the practice copy has some not very good copying, so things come out more faint. It's a pain to have to go and double check anything that doesn't get printed clearly. So yeah, having a librarian who makes sure that, for Zino, we should avoid sending this piece of junk, copy.
I don't want to make it sound like, oh, I'm so special.
No, but you're
Take
absolutely
special
right.
care for me. But sometimes I feel like they go extra mile in accommodating players, and their job is so tough. They're doing such an amazing job. For some of the ballets that we perform, it's not necessarily going to be one of the pieces that take up the whole program, like Sleeping Beauty or Don Quixote. Sometimes they bring what's called a mixed program. That means you can have up to 10, 11, 12, 14 different pieces. Some longer, some are shorter, and they all have different choreography. And it could be that this piece was taken on tour with that ballet company 5 years ago to San Francisco, and this piece was taken on tour 7 years ago by a different ballet company to Tokyo. And by the time the ballet company that we are currently performing with comes to town, librarians have to go through all this music, make sure that
they're giving the same edition, as it were.
They're given the same edition. They have to get this music to our concertmaster way ahead of time so he can put unified bowings, and make sure that the bowings match our orchestra's performing style. And he also has to be in contact with the music director, with the conductor who is coming with this ballet company, to make sure that it's all relatively,
And tell me about the ushers.
And the ushers, well, there are lots of stories about ushers, and I don't want to take too much time, but when you work long enough in a building and they know your face and you're nice to them, you're not being, kind of condescending performer, and these people are beneath me, no. And sometimes they also would go extra mile to help you in all sorts of situations. I mean, you're running through the corridor because you lost a button, and suddenly one of the ushers says, "What's wrong with you? Why are you so worried, Zino? I lost a button. I have a performance. I don't know what to do. Relax. I have an extra one." And he pulls out a button out of his jacket, just an extra button, little things like that,
It's amazing how little things make a big difference. I remember my first competition ever, and this was very stupid on my part. My first competition ever was the Tchaikovsky International, which was a stupidity unlike any other. But one of the things I didn't think about is how much or how little I would sweat on stage, especially with nerves. So I walked on stage and promptly began to sweat up a storm. And the second, the third works on the program for the first round, I remember, my fingers not being able to, stay on the fingerboard. They were sweaty. I remember, having a difficult time holding the instrument because I was sweating under my jaw. And the simple thing of, carry a handkerchief, have some, hand wipes for your hands. No one had told me this. And I guess my only point of gratitude for that experience was that I learned very, very quickly and forever that when you walk on stage, you want to make sure that you're prepared for all the things that will happen on stage, short of, carrying extra strings and rosin and things with you.
Right.
But everything short of that, for the going back to the idea.
Speaking about playing on stage, you're absolutely right here, and I'm actually the kind of person that uh, you can call it a little borderline obsessive compulsive, but I like to have uh, not one but two sets of spare strings in my case. And something happened to me, and I wanted to share it with you. It doesn't paint me in a very good light, but you cannot escape from the truth. Um,
And others can learn from your mistakes.
to my defense, all I can say that um, I was a student at the time, not a very smart one in the respect that I couldn't very well plan ahead very well, and I was also broke. So it just so happened that I had no spare strings in my violin case, and I showed up to play a wedding reception. Well, actually, it was a wedding rehearsal, if I recall it correctly. So the families are at the table, and I'm playing background music with a cellist, a friend of mine, and we were playing some, easygoing duos for violin and cello. And but to say we are playing, I have to tell you what happened before. I opened my case, and my D string was broken, and I had no spare strings. So I decided to make the best out of it. And as I was playing, I was playing. I was staying on G string for as long as I could,
And then you hop over to the A, of course.
and then I would start playing on A string, and vice versa. And we are playing this pretty much Baroque repertoire, which is mostly played between first and fourth position. That is, if you have all four strings on your instrument, which I didn't. I had only three. So I had to play on G string for a very, very long time. Half of the time I was playing, it sounded kind of like Moses variations of Paganini, but with Baroque flair. And I pulled it off, or so I thought, because after we finished playing, the bride to be came to thank us for the performance, and I started to suspect something when she was saying that, "Oh my God, I didn't expect to get such a virtuoso violin playing for my wedding rehearsal." And I started slowly turning the violin towards me, so the back of my violin would face this person. And she said that, all this virtuoso stuff, you were going so up high on G string, it's so in tune. And, I was like, "Are you a violinist?" She says, "Yes, I play in the Boston Symphony."
Oh, my dear Lord.
And that's when I almost died inside. And I hope she didn't notice that I was missing a string.
Actually,
And
that's where I would have flashed the front of the violin to say, this will not happen at the real thing. I'm so sorry. Thankfully, this was the rehearsal.
well, I just decided to, play it safer. I still wanted to get paid, so I said, "Oh, that's just me. That's what we do.
Yes.
When we are trained in Russia, that's how they train us. To play." Yeah. So just crank up my Russian accent, and that's it. But when I got home, I decided that never, ever, I'll run it dead on my credit card, but I'll have spare strings in my case.
Well,
Because I never want that to happen.
I have this thing that happens, it seems, just with Paganini Concerto. So I'll see your story and I raise you the following. A couple of years ago, I played Paganini number 2 with Manassas. And I had a bad feeling. My E string had broken in a couple of recitals beforehand. Like every time, every recital, I had broken.
Emil, I'm sorry. I didn't know he wrote more than one, but go on.
So the E string for the second concerto was maybe 2 days old, but I had a bad feeling, and I knew that a couple of my students were coming to the concert. I knew that one of them hadn't left home yet. Literally from backstage, I called her and said, "Listen, I have been an idiot. I have not brought a spare. Can you please bring a spare string? So sure enough, in performance, I got to the end of, I think it was the right before the end of the exposition, and the E string goes. Yeah. And of course, Paganini, again, I should explain to the parents, Paganini is generally, it's virtuosic to begin with. It goes very high up. You're going to be using that E string a lot. So when a new string is put on the instrument, it takes a little while to stretch. It's not just enough to put a new string on. You have to give it a little time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. But when you're frantically changing strings backstage and the audience and the orchestra are waiting front of the stage, and the poor conductor is having to, maintain some level of interest and order out of chaos, you don't have time. You just rush back to the stage. That was actually the second time that I had a string break in a Paganini. The first time was, of all things, the Paganini Competition, where in the Paganini Competition, did you do it?
No, I haven't done that one.
You know how they have different things, though, in the final round. Sometimes you play one concerto. Sometimes you play two concerti back to back. Sometimes you play one concerto one night and then a different concerto the next night.
Right.
Paganini is one concerto one night, a different concerto the next night. So I had the Paganini concerto first, and I had the Sibelius concerto the next night. And as I was waiting backstage for the person before me to finish playing Sibelius, and then I would come out to play Paganini, and she's playing phenomenally with Sayaka Shoji. So as I'm standing backstage and she's on the last page, under my arm, the violin is under my arm, and the E string breaks.
Wow.
And, of course, I had to run to change it, but the layout of the theater is such you have to take an elevator, you have to run down a hall. All of this is happening, and I asked one of the ushers, can the jury at least be told that this is what happened? I'm not just keeping them waiting. And she said, no, we're not allowed to give them any information. So at this point, I change the string. I come back. I know that I am in so much trouble. I walk out on stage knowing that I am basically a dead man walking at this point. And on stage, I crossed my fingers just as the orchestra was about to start the introduction. The front 10 rows saw that and started to laugh. And I suddenly relaxed, and I forgot the jury, and I played one of the best Paganini concerti of my life.
Wow. It's amazing.
Sometimes the thing that is the, bad luck turns into good luck. Of course, I then proceeded to completely shoot myself in the foot the next night with Sibelius, but at least I had the satisfaction of a good Paganini. But yes, walk out on stage with a little string envelope in your pocket if you're a man, and maybe if you're a lady, bring it out, put it on the conductor's music stand. You might need it.
Yeah, sometimes that experience can actually relax you, because it happened to me on one of my auditions for the orchestra. I was very well prepared, but still I was kind of on the nervous side of the spectrum, and my string broke, and it was my D string.
During the audition?
20 minutes before.
Oh, God.
And that's really not enough time to not just to change the string, but to make sure that it works. So on many orchestral auditions, you're not allowed to tune in between excerpts. And after I played the first excerpt, I really thought that tuning would not be a word to describe the intonation of my open strings. I need to do a major tune-up.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of relaxed me. I was like, well, whatever.
At this point.
At this point, it's unavoidable. I'll just finish playing, and if anything I play on D string sounds, 3 steps lower, then that's fine. And I pass to the next round. I don't know how, but it happened.
I am sure that, we can talk about that now. The whole feeling when you are on the committee listening to the candidates. I'm sure that the committee had a moment of, oh my gosh, he's been, playing as in tune as he has been with that major, a handicap with a string that's sinking right under his fingers. I'm sure that would score you some sort of credibility points.
Well, I would hope so, because, I just, speaking of your experience, for some reason that relaxed me.
Yeah.
the situation was unavoidable, and
You feel that the worst has already happened, so what's there to fear?
exactly. So it can happen to anyone, no matter how prepared are you, and
Absolutely.
no matter how many spare strings you have with you. It might happen 30 minutes before you have to go and play. It might happen 4 minutes before you have to go on stage. So
And the
just
strings, of course, aren't the only thing. Your
have strings
your
and just
shoulder
go out
rest.
there and do the best you can.
Yeah. The audition committee. I want to talk a little bit about that. The things that they're listening for and how. Like when an accident happens to somebody that you are listening to, don't you find, now that you are judging people, don't you find that this gives you a certain amount of respect for them?
Well, to be honest, there are two kinds of people on audition, and I'll be painfully
Be
honest.
be brutal.
Yeah, I'll be very brutal and very honest. There are two kinds of people. One is people like you and people such as myself, and we are the kind of people that will definitely add points for accident that happens on stage, and the person is not diving, the person is not caving, the person is still playing,
Dankeschön.
and yeah. And there are other kinds of people that I very much dislike. Sorry for using such strong words, but these are the kind of people that forgot how the audition goes themselves, and suddenly they have such high demands. Suddenly they have such high standards, and if one note is only ever so slightly out of tune, they become very snobby about it. So whenever I have to serve an audition committee, I like to tell the joke before we actually start the audition. I remember this old joke about this old lady coming to a butcher shop, kosher butcher shop, and there is. I hope I'm not offending any vegetarian and vegan people who are listening to this podcast. It's just part of the job, And there are all this chicken lying on the shelf, and she picks up one chicken, looks at it this way, looks at it that way, flips it around, smells it here, smells it there, puts it aside, takes another chicken and does the same thing, turns, looks at it under the microscopic glass, magnifying glass, sorry, puts it away, takes the third chicken, and this poor butcher is watching this whole scene, looking at her. And after about 20 minutes of this going on, he says, "Lady, do you think you would pass this kind of test?" So I always tell this joke to kind of remind the audition committee that we are looking for the best musician, we are looking for the best fit, and it doesn't have to be necessarily the player who plays 100% notes correctly, because that's virtually impossible. So
Well,
let's not.
there's a sort of attitude that was beautifully described by a fellow faculty member at a summer festival. I had to play Introduction to Rondo, and I was really upset with myself because one spot was a total mess. I don't know if you have the image in your head of the intro in Rondo. Third page, the mi major
Mhm,
arpeggios that sort of twist. I
mhm.
got finger tangled and I screwed it up. And I came backstage really upset. And this fellow faculty member said to me, I find that there are two kinds of people that come to listen to concerts: the ones who come to enjoy the music, and the ones who come to enjoy the fact that I made a mistake. And I think that it is my job to send both of these people home happy.
That's a good one.
And it's absolutely true. I think that the people who are going to do the audition circuit, the students and the recent students, the less recent students, the people doing the audition circuit should remember that there will be some people on the committee that are of the second sort, that they rejoice in finding the note that you played out of tune, or the
Right,
whatever it is.
right. Actually, perfect description of the kind of people I was mentioning.
Yeah.
And I really dislike this kind of attitude.
But I
when it
think
comes to-
I think that those people are going to be unavoidable both in a general audience and in a competitive situation. In a competition, how many times have you and I, in our competition days, how many times did we meet the juror who has their own student or their own agenda because they promised a friend that they would support the friend's student or whatever. Um, and so when they hear a strong player make a misstep, they're very happy. They get to legitimately say, "Oh no, so and so doesn't pass to the next round because they had this error or that."
Yeah, unfortunately, there are the kind of competitions that instead of choosing the best uh, player today, or perhaps not the best player today, but the player who has the best future out of the rest of the players, they choose the safe path and they choose the general level of mediocrity.
Yeah.
I'm sure we both faced competitions like that. Uh, one of my uh, solo competition stories is, and I don't want to mention the name of the competition for obvious reasons. I played in the final round, and one of the concertos I played was Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto, and I felt like it was one of my last, if not the last competition I'm doing, because I wanted to get serious about orchestral auditions, and I just decided to let it all go. And I said, for once in my life, I'm going to play Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto the way I really want it to sound. Not that I lost notes or passages or anything, but I guess it was slightly unusual, you know. I decided to show just a tiny bit of my personality, God forbid. How could I? Because one of the jury members, and again, I don't want to mention this
For
person's
obvious
name
reasons.
uh, for obvious reasons, um, I got an honorary mention diploma, and this jury member told me that he congratulated me on my performance, and then he said that if you want to get one of the top prizes and not honorary mention diploma, try to play more mainstream version of Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto. It's really going to help you. And I was very thankful, for him, being brutally honest with me. But I thought to myself that maybe at this point of my life, I'm making a right decision to concentrate on orchestral auditions, because that's not how I really see myself.
Well, and I have to say, I've heard, from both jury members and first place winners, I've heard debate about this point. About try to play it more mainstream. A very famous violinist. I feel like very often in these podcasts I don't mention names for very obvious reasons. But here, actually, I can mention the name. I think the story doesn't put this player in any kind of negative light. Vadim Repin, gold medal, Queen Elizabeth competition. What was it? 1987, I think. He was all of, I think, 16.
16 years.
Yeah. And he was, or no, I think it was 1989, and he was like 18 or something. But anyway, he was, head and shoulders the winner, you could see. And I asked him, this was many years later, I asked him, when you were there, did you feel that you were head and shoulders above? And he said, no, because, yes, I had won things before, but I had everything to lose. So first of all, no, I did not feel myself, to be walking off with first place. I said, and did your teacher, very famous teacher, Zachar Bron, did your teacher give you any kind of strategic advice, how you should play the different rounds? He said, yes, actually he did. The first round, your job is not to get cut. Your job is to make it to the second round. So in the first round, absolutely mainstream, absolutely clean, no, eyebrow raising issues anywhere. The second round, where usually there are some sonatas, you can show a bit more of yourself, but still, avoid being on the discard list. And it is only in the last round, he said, that you can truly show yourself in contention for first place. And that's one side of the spectrum that is different from the jury member who talked to you. I have also heard from jury members, to myself, to other people, play more mainstream. Your performance was very interesting, but in the context of a competition, very interesting is not the way you want to go. You don't
Does
want to
not
be
prove your
remembered as the
point.
weirdo. And
Right.
I also, and this is where, have you ever been in a competition jury internationally? I know that you've been a judge for many area competitions.
Not internationally.
But even in area competitions, I think it's probably the same sort of thing where if you do hear somebody playing very interesting and totally different, again, I think you are probably like me. I rejoice at that, and I want to, I want to put that playing ahead.
Right. I want to support this player.
Yeah.
Definitely.
The one time it happened exceptionally, there was a violinist at an international contest who was playing Franck Sonata, and I had not considered more than 50% of the fingerings and bowings that he had done. It had never occurred to me. There were fascinating things. They weren't strung together coherently necessarily, but they were really interesting. Unfortunately, it was also out of tune. And then I want to support that playing, but I can't, to a fellow jury member, say this person is better, suited to pass to the next round, because I have to acknowledge this person was just not clean.
Right.
So,
well, it's a very delicate balance, but in general, I feel like often I feel like, Bela Bartok said very famous, very short phrase: "Competitions are for horses." And often I feel like you cannot really judge a violinist based on all kinds of variety of repertoire. Does it mean that this person can do everything equally well, starting from solo Bach, ending with a virtuoso piece and piece written in the 21st century?
right, exactly.
Or does it mean that this person can do it all equally well enough? Let's put it this way.
Conversant with all those different styles, but not necessarily expert in each.
Right. I mean, even maybe I'm going to say something that's sacrilegious, but even when we listen to the great performers of the
I was going
past,
to go there.
and starting with Jascha Heifetz, David Oistrakh, Henrik Schering, and you name the rest of them, in no particular order. Menuhin, they all come to mind. Arthur Grumio, and we all have our favorites
For different
types of
repertoire.
repertoire. I would much rather listen Mozart violin concertos with Grumio, and not even his live performances, but his studio recordings, rather than with Jascha Heifetz. Does it mean that I dislike Jascha Heifetz? He was a god. He was one of
Absolutely.
the gods. But I would rather listen to Heifetz's performance of Sibelius.
Actually, I was going to say that for me, the Heifetz-Oistrakh divide is that there is no one for me to compare to Heifetz in the salon miniature. And I go first to Oistrakh, and then I start looking at anywhere else, maybe, for the major concerti.
Right, and that's where it all happens. Even if it happens to the great ones in our mind, how can we judge, or how can we be judged by playing Mozart, two Paganini caprices, romantic sonata, two concertos, solo Bach, and expect it all to be equally interesting?
I think the advice that I would give somebody going for solo competitions is like we were saying just a moment ago. You can't be expected to be an expert in everything, but you can be expected to be educated about everything.
Right.
And when you are obviously, unaware that Bach has stylistic differences from, Beethoven, let alone from, Wieniawski, when you're unaware of this, it's not an opportunity for a jury member to cut you. It is kind of an obligation. You are revealing a weakness that is not technical, that is educational.
Right.
So when you are taking it back to the orchestra, when you are on the committee, how do you deal with that? Because of course the excerpts run a very wide gamut from from the 18th through the 21st centuries.
Well, of course, with orchestras, there are general guidelines, and the two most obvious ones are: make sure you don't rush. Rhythmical stability is very important.
Would you say rhythmic stability is even more important than intonation?
No, it's important. And the second most important thing is intonation.
Yeah.
Again, in no particular order. But those two have to be there. If it's not there, you're not interested.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's the certain, sine qua non. Without this, there's no point in talking about anything else. Assuming that now we're talking about the players in the second round who have, already been, the stronger players have already been separated out. They're rhythmically, reliable as a rock, intonationally stable. A note out of tune is one thing, but intonational wandering is something else. So now we're talking about a player who first has to play the excerpt from, let's say, Midsummer Night's Dream, and then they have to play Don Juan, and then they have to play, what would you listen, Rachmaninoff or Mozart?
Well, the most difficult part is when you play the overture from Barthold Bride, and the second excerpt that's in the program is a slow excerpt.
Oh, and you have to get your rhythm to go.
A slow movement from Brahms Symphony or Mozart Symphony, where it doesn't necessarily start with fortissimo. Sometimes it says to piano. And after doing all that for such a long time, suddenly you have to place the bow on a string and let it make sound. And make sure the bow doesn't shake after all that. And that's when specific preparation for an audition comes into play. Because at some point when you prepare for an orchestra audition, you try to position excerpts back to back in the most uncomfortable way to get yourself prepared for that order that could throw you off.
In an audition, do you have a few seconds to compose yourself?
Yes.
So let's say you've just finished playing the Smetana, and now you're being asked, I don't know, like you said, Brahms, let's say. Solo. The solo from the First Symphony, second movement.
Right. So the secret here is to flip the page, raise the violin, and run through your mind 2-3 measures of the piece you're about to play. And then slowly raise the bow, and, that reset happens. You have good 5, 6, 10 seconds. Nobody will rush you ever. If anything, again, in my book, you receive very strong points that the person really knows what he or she is doing. Yeah, and take your time. And then you see, also with the auditions, sometimes the situation is unpredictable because it also very much depends on the style of the orchestra, and most of the time music director dictates the style, right? So again, I don't want to mention any names, but it's a very famous, probably one of the most famous orchestras in the United States. And when you're playing for this orchestra, you're allowed to play one glissando. That is, if you're playing Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto, in the opening, from A to C sharp. That's it. This music director.
I'm replaying it in my mind. No,
the solo part. La si, la do. That's it.
Okay,
yeah.
The only glissando you're
no
allowed.
more glissandos. That's it. Yeah. So, for example, in my orchestra, I guess that was I'm guessing my lucky situation, because later on I found out that our former music director, who was an amazing conductor, amazing musician, Maestro Heinz Fricke, he really liked the excerpt of from Siegfried Ideal,
Yeah.
which starts with a very, very long G in the first violin section, open G.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to hold this note for, I don't remember how many measures. And the count is very, very slow. So before that, that was exactly the situation. Um, I was playing an excerpt from Falstaff, Verdi Falstaff. It happens towards the end of the first act, and it's a fast excerpt, and I messed it up. There are a couple of notes that were not clear, to say the least. The contact of the bow with the string just wasn't there, and it sounded like I made a mistake. And the committee didn't stop me, so I opened the page for Siegfried Ideal, and I decided, again, well, whatever. And I just put the bow on the string and imagined myself being in a practice room, practicing long, separate bows, which I always suggest to every violinist to do so. It comes handy, like in my case it did. And I just held this open G forever, endlessly, painfully slow. Painfully slowly, I started to play the excerpt because, again, as you prepare for orchestral auditions, especially when the repertoire is not very, very familiar, you try to listen to every possible recording of this piece. And some of the recordings were faster, some of them were slower, and for some reason I decided to take it on the slower side. And I also thought that it's going to calm me down, which it did. And so I played this excerpt painfully slowly. I was thinking about every bow change I make and making sure that nobody will be able to recognize that I'm actually making a bow change. And I guess that redeemed me, because in the end of the session, when I was done with all of the excerpts that were assigned to this round, I was asked to play the Verdi excerpt again. Sometimes if the committee likes your playing, they will ask you to repeat an excerpt if they were not sure about something. So I was given a chance to
Undo. Yeah.
and I played it much better, and that's how I passed to the next round, to the final round.
This was for the National Opera, yeah?
Yes.
And were they...
But again, I was just lucky because, as I found out later, our music director likes this type of slow tempo, and he likes this type of playing. I guess that was it, for
Yeah,
him.
that moved you from the no column or the maybe column into the probable yes or possible yes.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. The narrative in the listener's mind is being formed. I forgot to ask, are the opera auditions behind a screen? Did they see the bowings you were doing?
No. The opera auditions are behind the screen, and that includes the final round, because in some orchestras, they have a tradition of removing the screen for the final round. In our orchestra, we keep the screen down. We don't know who the candidate is until we announce the winner of the audition, or winners of the audition if we have multiple positions open. And that's when the manager makes an announcement backstage, and the winner or the winners come out through this screen. And
do you often get surprises when the winners come out?
Not really. Not really. Till the very last moment, we don't know who it is.
But if you happen to know, for example, that some friend or some student or somebody is auditioning, can you pick their playing out from behind the screen?
It depends on the personality of a player, and it also depends on the day and on a particular day and particular number of people who are auditioning today. Because sometimes we start at 9 a.m. and we end at 6 p.m.
Yeah, how does that work when you are trying to make decisions that will affect the quality of your ensemble and frankly alter somebody's life? How do you keep your brain active, your ears from becoming overloaded?
Well, number one, we take breaks. Number two, we divide players in the groups of 6 or 8. This group performs. We have a discussion. We have a vote. If we have doubts, we might ask a person to play again. And we never have limited numbers, that we can allow only a certain number of people to the
Right.
next round. No, we allow everyone who deserves to be in the next round. And then it comes to the next group. But actually, in one of the auditions, I still remember the numbers. There are two players who absolutely struck me as the best out of the whole group. And believe it or not, till this day, I think it happened in 2001. So it was a long time ago. Till this day, I remember the numbers of these players. It was number 9 and number 26 out
Yeah.
of the first round.
And
Because
how many people in that first round in 2001, by the way?
it was about 120 something.
Yeah.
But the players, till this day, I remember the players number 9 and number 26 were absolutely better than anyone else. And number 26 got the job. It was only one position open, but it was a really, really tough decision.
Yeah.
Between these two players.
You know,
Both of them made the final round, and everyone had doubts if you are making the right decision. It just all came to the vote, one voice out of the committee
and
deciding the fate.
it does pay to know for students especially. We're all used to getting that thick envelope or that thin envelope from the conservatory or the college. And when you get the thin envelope that has the rejection letter, they all start the same way, that the standard was so high and our committee had such a difficult time choosing one. And we are all used to, and in a competition, the chairman of the jury always comes out and makes the same speech in every competition I've ever been in, as a member of the jury or as a player. There's always the same speech, and there's always the same reaction on the part of the people competing for the job, which is, "Oh, come on, get it over with. Just go ahead and announce, because we don't believe a word of this. It was so difficult," speech. But it does pay to remember, as Zino just pointed out, that sometimes that speech is really heartfelt and honest, and sometimes it really does come down to.
Well, Emil, when it comes to, sorry to interrupt, but when it comes to orchestral auditions these days, every time it's very honest, because the general level is so high that any one of these players can get a job and become a perfect colleague for many, many years to come.
Yeah.
It comes to very, very small details, and that's how you separate, and often you doubt yourself.
Even years after, yeah.
Even
But
years after.
there was a guest on the podcast a few weeks ago, I think. I don't remember who it was, who pointed out that the level of the orchestras for which Wagner wrote, for which Brahms wrote, for which, God help us, Beethoven wrote, that level was much, much, much lower. I mean, any one of these composition gods would be delighted to write for any professional symphony orchestra today, because the full-time job of those players and the training and the selection process are so demanding, that the final ensemble is of an unimaginably high level for somebody living around 1820.
Right. And it also pays to remember that in today's audition world, actually not today's audition world, but the world where I started to take orchestral auditions, 24 years ago. Many, many years ago, before our time, it was very well known that the type of people who audition for Boston Symphony and Philadelphia Orchestra and Cleveland, New York Philharmonic, are different type of people from the people who audition for Knoxville Symphony, Chattanooga Symphony, smaller regional symphony orchestras. But when I started auditioning, that wasn't the case. It was the same pack of Curtis, Juilliard, NEC,
You see the same faces as a contestant.
Yeah, graduates going from audition to audition. They didn't limit themselves to just top 5 or top 10 orchestras. We saw each other everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I remember this wasn't that
so,
long
so, so,
ago.
so the level of an audition for Knoxville Symphony can be as high as any of the
New
big
York
ones.
Philharmonic, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember, it doesn't really matter exactly when, but it was after 2010 and before 2014 at some point. Actually, no, it was right before 2010, but it was around 2009. So long ago, but not that long ago. I remember playing down in Georgia, in Macon, and just as I had gotten down there to do the Wieniawski second, they were holding auditions for a new concertmaster. And the administration of the orchestra and the conductor were all very shocked, or pleased and shocked, I guess, that they had such a turnout. It was, 20, 20 to 30 people, and they expected like 8. And I was thinking to myself, well, 20 or 30 isn't that bad. I could imagine it being, 100, 125, people all wanting a concertmaster job. Maybe it was the fact that this was 2009, and now in 2021, there would be 125 people.
Well, with this health situation, for sure.
Yeah, that's where I was going with this. What do you think the prospect is for all those people, especially from major ensembles, the New York Philharmonic, the Metropolitan Opera, where in New York the cost of living is so high, and where people are sitting for a year without an income? What do you think the prospect is for lots of seats suddenly freeing up? Wouldn't the people who leave those seats then either re-audition for them or just reclaim them?
Well, it's hard to know exactly what's going to happen because, again, it has to be taken case by case basis. It's different.
Let's look at the opera. What has the pandemic done for you guys?
For us, well, it hit us hard. It hit us very hard, and we haven't been working for quite some time, since March of 2020.
Has there been any stipend during that whole time?
Well, yes, we've been getting reduced salary, but thankfully to the management and the Kennedy Center and the management of the Washington National Opera, we are getting something and we are able to survive, unlike Metropolitan Opera, who are getting nothing. So again, it's different.
And they, as far as I read, correct me please if I'm wrong, but I read that they are hiring non-Metropolitan musicians to play things like for the New Year's Gala.
I've heard it, and to me, it's if it's true what the media is saying, it's ridiculous. Because
to think that this ensemble is somehow, well, if you know which end of the violin is which, then I guess we'll take you into our orchestra. After all of this,
well, it's really a shame because I grew up with the video of, it was still VHS tape. I don't know how many of today's listeners know what it is, and it was a recording of La Traviata with Placido Domingo and Teresa Stratos, and the orchestra on this recording is Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, conducted by Levine, and it's one of the best operatic orchestra playing you will ever hear in your life. So it's just an amazing orchestra with such a great tradition and such a great history, such a great list of conductors and singers that they worked with, that whatever happens with them right now, it's a shame. Right now, when it's quiet performance wise during this pandemic time, sometimes I flip through pardon me, our old orchestra season programs, and I really begin to sound like an old man. I see the names of back in the day, where we had Placido Domingo singing with us, once or twice every season. I'm not talking about once or twice, 1 or 2 opera productions, and each of these operas happened, 10 to 12 times. You see names like, Carreras and Kiri Tekanawa and Mirella Freni,
Mirella Freni.
and the list goes on and on and on. And on one hand, I feel like, oh my God, I'm getting old. I remember all these people. But then it's such a blessing to have this type of memories, because I remember the feeling exactly when I was accompanying these amazing singers, feeling like I am participating in one of the most important master classes of my life, how to treat every note that comes out of your mouth in case of a singer, in case of a great singer that I'm accompanying at the moment, and make it so special and make it so different every time. And then I'm realizing not only I'm participating, I'm working alongside these amazing people and I'm getting paid for it. So it's like one of the best situations in the world.
It is a wonderful job and a terrible profession. You know,
Right.
you
Well,
do something so significant and something that you love, and on top of that, even get paid for it. On the other hand, of course, getting there is such a struggle. And
yes.
do you think that in the post-pandemic world that there will be a period of upheaval, though, that people will be moving around, that swaths of seats will be open, or do you think that like water sloshing around and finding its level, that things will rapidly return to where it was?
Maybe I'm being a little too optimistic, but I think people are uh, missing these performances.
Oh, I don't think you're being optimistic.
I
I think
think
that's absolutely true.
halls will fill up, because in Europe, where they do allow socially distanced audiences, um, people are lining up to buy tickets.
I think there's been a model in existence for decades that the classical world might find, and that is the model of professional sports. So you can have millions of people watching a football game on TV, but then the people who are extra passionate, devoted, whatever, will actually pay money, and sometimes very serious money, to go in person to the stadium.
Well, well, here is the thing. We used to have this situation in this country when a famous classical musician, was as famous as any pop musician or any sports personality at the time.
hmm
You can just, um, I don't know if you've seen this cartoon, Bugs Bunny. One of the Bugs Bunny cartoons where,
I do have 4 children.
well, there is one particular cartoon where it starts with a tenor uh, warming up, singing his arias, and at the very same time, Bugs Bunny is trying to sleep. And Bugs Bunny decides to take revenge on this tenor. And he shows up to the concert at which this tenor is about to perform solo arias. He shows up dressed as a conductor. And as he walks through the orchestra, Bugs Bunny puts his ears down, puts something white on his head, and he puts white gloves on his paws, on his hands. And the musicians of the orchestra start whispering the name Leopold. Leopold. You've seen this? So it wasn't done for us, for musicians. It was done for general audiences.
Who immediately knew which Leopold they were
They
talking about.
immediately recognized that this is a joke directed at Leopold Stokowski.
Yeah.
He was as famous as it gets,
Well,
you ask any
think about
common person.
the movie They Shall Have Music. They
Right.
Shall Have Music is a mostly forgettable Capra-esque Hollywood production, which was created as a vehicle to feature Jascha Heifetz on the movie screen. Jascha Heifetz, who was, too proud for, being a PR kind of hound, and who was very proud of the fact that he did not act in this movie at all. He was just himself.
Right.
He actually considered it a point of honor that he was such a terrible actor in a movie that was created to feature him on the big screen.
Right. There was another movie called Carnegie Hall.
Yes.
Which featured
featured him,
Gorsky. Yeah. Many
again, we're talking about a major Hollywood studio thinking, what shall we do with all of this disposable capital? What vehicle shall we create that will make us money? They're not doing this because they are philanthropic in nature. And the Hollywood studio decides the thing that will make us money is to bring these great artists that are ordinarily accessible to 2,000 people inside Carnegie Hall. We're going to bring these people and make them accessible to 200 million people from coast to coast.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I'm trying to say. If in today's world somebody decides to take interest and promote classical music at such level as other types of music are promoted or sports are promoted, again, it's all promotion. You hear the names of famous football players or hockey players since you are a child,
whether you are interested or not.
Exactly. I remember my immigration to my first stop in this country was Denver, Colorado, and I remember all these names. Till this day, I remember the last name Rotola and Elway. Those were the famous football players of Denver Broncos, if my memory is correct. And
I have no idea because.
And till this day, I remember these names because that's what you heard all the time.
Yeah.
These names. Later, I found out that Marin Alsop, who's an amazing conductor, was the music director of Colorado Symphony. This name wasn't around
when you were in Denver. Yeah.
When I was in Denver, but John Elway was.
But I just
he scored major touchdowns, whatever it means.
I saw a thing just recently that this very popular show, Queen's Gambit, I think it's on Netflix, which I've watched and loved, but the writer was struggling for something like 30 years to get the show made, and the usual objection was, who's interested in a movie about chess? And yeah, from a studio executive's perspective, you might think that there isn't anyone, but chess clubs exist and have existed, and hundreds of thousands of people consume chess products of one sort or another, magazines, watch tournaments, et cetera, et cetera. There is a clientele out there, and when someone saw fit to finally greenlight an outreach to that clientele, they have a blockbuster on their hands. And I think one day, this is me being optimistic, one day in the aftermath of the pandemic, I'm hoping that a studio executive somewhere says, this entire time that people could not attend live concerts, and that musicians have been live streaming, and that people have been reaching out directly to an audience base, orchestras have been finding a far greater audience than one contained within one city. Is there some way to capitalize on that? Because obviously we do have lots and lots of people who will consume the product if only we see fit to deliver the product.
Well, it's a very interesting point, but I think it all will come back to still general audiences enjoying live performances. One or two times we watched the Fledermaus in Vienna on New Year's Eve in Vienna Volksoper. As you know, they have 3 opera houses in Vienna: Staatsoper, Volksoper, and the Theater am der Wien. And we watched the Volksoper production, which was absolutely wonderful. And this year we couldn't be there, and the performance was canceled due to this pandemic. And we watched instead something on the TV with star-studded cast. I mean, incredible singing, incredible orchestra. But still, it wasn't the same.
Of course.
It was not the same as live performance. And I'm sure that there are so many people who do realize that. But definitely reaching out and finding new ways to reach out to new audiences is long overdue. Let's put it this way.
Well, this is where I'm trying to see, something of a silver lining on the other side of this, that when we can have the best of all possible worlds, when we can have the excitement of the in-person concert, the excitement for the musicians as much as for the audience. When we can have that combined with this new database of lovers of music, a database that has been created by necessity over the past 10 months, perhaps will come out with a sort of renaissance. I mean, when I can see you in person, Zino, we can raise a glass and toast to this bright future.
Absolutely, and let's make sure it happens sooner than later.
I know that we have some questions from people watching, which is great. So let's go to those. There is a question from a student at the Kirov Academy. She is a dance and vocal student. She has performed opera and musical theater for the Dr. Phillips Center for the Performing Arts in Orlando. Are there any opera or musical theater youth groups for which she would be able to audition?
Well, that would be the question best directed to the department of the Kennedy Center that is responsible for it. I know much more about auditions for the orchestra, and sometimes I do hear things about auditions for young artist program, singers, young artists.
Well, for example, the Kafritz program at Kennedy Center, right?
Yeah, formerly known as Domingo K-Fritz program. Now it's known only as K-Fritz program. But
we're not necessarily gonna need to go there, but
no, but
audition.
But I do miss
Placido. I'm sure.
But I do miss Placido Domingo. I'm going to say that.
I'm sorry. Say again, please.
I do miss Placido Domingo. I'm going to say that.
Yeah.
And well, as soon as these auditions are posted, I'm sure it's good to check with the Washington National Opera from time to time. And
is there back in my competition days, there was a sort of telephone book, you might say, that was put out by the Concert Artists Guild, and it was a listing. It was incomplete because, of course, there were competitions being created practically daily, but it was a good place to start. It was a listing of competitions by whether they're national or international, and by instrument.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something similar that the Kennedy Center puts out or is thinking of putting out?
Well, not the Kennedy Center, but for orchestra auditions, there is this newspaper called International Musician, which you receive once a month. You can receive it, the physical copy or electronically. And if you're a member, you have to be a member of the union, Musicians Union of the United States. And then you receive this newspaper automatically. And in the end, you have every audition in the United States and Canada
listed.
Yeah.
And there, for Annabelle, I would say that there is almost certainly a publication. And if the Kennedy Center itself doesn't put such a publication out, they would know, presumably, whether it exists and where it can be found. There's youth musical theater and opera opportunities. I'm assuming that are going to be associated with most of the major opera houses. Is that an accurate assumption?
Yes, assuming that we have so few major opera houses, but yes, they're available.
Well, there are the huge ones. There is, of course, the Metropolitan, but there are things down in Florida.
San Francisco, Chicago Lyric Opera, Houston Grand Opera, and our Washington National Opera.
Which is right there, a great place to begin.
Yes, I think so.
Do we have any other? I'm looking to see if there are any other questions. Yes. Can you invite musicians from other countries, like a pianist virtuoso or other very talented musicians? Can you tell me what is the process? So I think the question is, how does a guest artist get invited from abroad whether it's a singer for the National Opera, or a violin soloist or piano soloist from abroad to play with the National Symphony?
Well, if you're a singer, uh, I know that Washington National Opera often has auditions for different roles in different operas. And again, if you inquire, you find out about the opportunities. Um, Also, with the National Symphony Orchestra, they have contact with all sorts of different managements all over the world, and that's how they choose and that's how they invite musicians from abroad to
I
perform.
should point out I had a podcast some weeks ago with Andrew Kwan, who is a manager an artist manager in Toronto. He does not specialize in singers. He, as far as I know, specializes in chamber groups and soloists, but basically in instrumentalists.
Mhm.
So you might look for, if you don't already know of management in your country, you might look for, look into getting management. But as a singer, you want to definitely look for somebody who has a roster of singers. They will know when these auditions are taking place, if there are auditions, or if there is a role being filled for which foreign artists are being considered. A manager will know of such a role being filled and will, if they're doing their job for you, seek to get you at least considered. They can't get you the job. They can get you the audition, maybe. Right? Does the National Opera often have individual guest artists that they invite, or is it more often an entire company that comes, like Kirov or Mariinsky?
No, for the opera, it's individual artists.
Because I
Always.
remember seeing the only time I saw Mirella Freni live, Tchaikovsky, Maid of Orleans,
Mhm.
And it was her and Leiferkus.
Yes.
And it was, two A-list, soloists invited, from two different countries, invited from two different agencies. I don't remember if they had the same manager. But
Well,
presumably
uh,
the opera wanted specifically Freni and specifically Leiferkus, right?
yes. Yes. Usually, it's when we talk about big name stars, when we talk about big artists, it's specifically this person who is going to be singing this role. And when we talk about artists who are just making names for themselves, there are going to be an audition announced, and the people who are auditioning, they're looking for obviously great voice and great acting ability, and also there is a staging director who must find somebody that suits this particular role in the staging process. So also a lot of different
But of course,
criteria involved.
when you are a superstar, that casting process is more lenient. When I saw Freni playing Joan of Arc at age, Joan of Arc was in the opera, I think, age 17
Yes,
or 18,
I think.
and Mirella Freni was 70.
Hmm.
And I had no problem forgetting how old Freni was or how young Joan was. I was listening to a great singer.
Well, with
I'm sure
singers
for the
like that,
casting
you do
director,
forget.
they knew that I would be listening for the great singer.
With singers like that, you do forget their age, and you just concentrate on music, on their vocal skills that are still unsurpassed. Even with Mirella Freni at the age of 70, or with Placido Domingo, when he was singing at the age of 70, it was still the best voice out there.
Yeah.
You
I
can.
think for the questioner, one thing that you should remember, though, is that the odds of your being invited by a major house like the National Opera, a major orchestra like the National Symphony, out of nowhere because your agent got you an audition, those odds are very, very low. The odds are that you would be considered for a smaller production, more regional production, which is where your name would eventually be made. That, of course, doesn't take into account some lucky break. You are the understudy for some superstar. The superstar gets sick. You come out. You deliver the performance of a lifetime. You are now a superstar also. That's the way Hollywood would paint it, but in real terms, it doesn't happen very often. Or
Well, in real terms, that's what happened to Placido Domingo, when he substituted Franco Corelli on stage in the Metropolitan Opera. He got sick, and Placido got a call, I think, 2 hours before the opera, or 1 hour before the opera. He was driving towards the Metropolitan Opera and warming up in his car.
Yeah.
And he
I would
went
say
on stage, and that's when
I can think of 3 people this happened to. Domingo, in the in the instrumental world, Gil Shaham, who got called to replace Itzhak Perlman in London.
In London, yeah.
And Leonard Bernstein.
Right.
And absolutely, those 3 names are gods. They are legends in our time. Yeah. But think of how many artists there are, how many famous artists there are. Out of all these hundreds of famous artists, we can think of 3 that had this fortunate lucky break.
Well, maybe it's just that we know of 3. Maybe there are
10.
Maybe we don't know how many.
Yeah, but I would still argue that there are, hundreds of people who work their way up the ranks, as it were, for every one person who was fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time with the right preparation, we should add.
Well, actually, the Hollywood analogy you made is a very, very good one. I remember, Leonard Slatkin, one of the greatest conductors I worked with. He always said something very inspiring after the masterclass at which he conducted. He said, honestly, not all of you are going to become major soloists with major symphony orchestras, and not all of you are going to be part of Berlin Philharmonic or orchestra like that. But he said that this is not the point. The point is to remember, why are we doing it in the first place? What drives us to the beauty of our instrument, to the amazing fact that we can actually make music with our 2 hands and whatever is involved when playing the corresponding instruments you were talking about. And in one hand, it sounded like kind of a bitterish reality, to hear these words coming from such a famous conductor after this absolutely mind-blowingly amazing masterclass, the way he conducted. I still remember my first encounter with him. It was Berlioz overture, and I never thought that our student orchestra can sound like that, but he made it happen in 10 minutes. And then he said that, and I remember walking home and thinking about it and realizing that, but he's right. It is the point, but it's not the point. The point is something else. And that's why we are still doing this.
Well, yeah, there's it's not enough to enjoy playing the violin in my living room. It's not enough to just enjoy the music in a vacuum. The point is still making music in this kind of symbiosis with the audience and with your fellow musicians, whether you're playing chamber music, whether you are, in a regional production of the Mikado. The point is music performed.
Right.
And that's where I feel this year has been more even than the lost paychecks. Where it's been most painful is people who love music. And when they start, performing it in their own living room, they realize that a lot is missing.
Well, even soccer players are complaining that it's a different game without the audience.
Of course.
In a soccer stadium. I just read this interview with Cristiano Ronaldo, who is one of the greatest living soccer players.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that it's a different game.
Completely.
When the stadium empty. So what are we going to say as musicians? Of course, we are
I've,
nothing. We are nothing without the audience. So it really takes a long time to get used to playing in front of the um, computer
in front of
camera
the screen, yeah.
in your living room. Trying to find a nicer background in your house and dress up, which you never do when you're at home, and
Mm-hmm.
you know try to look and sound
Deal with
presentable.
the acoustics of a house as opposed to
Yeah, deal with the
a hall.
acoustic, deal with the Ethernet cable, whatever it means, and all this
I, I
technological.
remember reading in Mark Twain that I think it was Innocents Abroad, that he went to a production of Lohengrin in Germany. Or no, it had to be a symphony concert because he was complaining in the book about how German audiences sat absolutely silent between movements, and how demoralizing this must be for those poor musicians. If I were, up there on that stage delivering, my soul to a completely quiet hall, I would feel myself both silly and demoralized. Basically, that's the gist of what he wrote. And I remember on reading that suddenly feeling my first ever pang of envy for ballet dancers. Because in ballet, they do something spectacular and the audience bursts into applause without the flow of the performance necessarily being interrupted.
Right.
Um, and then you're doing something tremendous, Paganini or something else. You're not doing it only for the applause, but the applause is a function of why you're doing it.
Yeah, or like in the opera, the singer sings this amazing aria, and the audience goes wild, and they will ask sometimes,
For an encore.
for an encore, and this aria or this chorus from Nabucco will be sung and played again, and imagine your uh, solo performance or even just the orchestra performance, and this principal flute plays this amazing solo and the audience goes completely wild, like for a soccer player that just scored, and they stop the concert, he walks around the orchestra shaking hands, hugging people, he did such a great job, sits down and does it again, let's see
you
if you
know,
can score one more time.
you know the joke though about that.
Which one?
Supposedly at La Scala, where young soprano made her debut. I don't remember the opera, but with the first aria, the audience bursts into applause and shouts of "Brava, brava, bis." So unable to believe her good fortune and success, she sings the aria again, and again the audience bursts into wild applause, "Bis, bis." And by now, the musicians know that they've got a long production ahead of them. They start shouting "Basta," and the audience keeps shouting "Bis, bis," encore. And now the orchestra is openly shouting "Basta, enough." And finally, one voice, louder than the rest, yells down from the balcony, "Lo canterà finché non canta giusto." She'll keep singing it until she gets it right. So, yeah.
Yeah, sometimes there is this bitter feeling after a performance you do. I'm talking about myself, solo or chamber music.
I think it's true for everyone.
And you listen to the recording afterwards and you think, now I know what went wrong. It
Yes.
should have been done so differently.
The spirit of the stairs, the spirit of regret that if only I had. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And, we all have regrets. And I guess that's part of this art, which is a living art.
A
It's not
transient one.
it's
Everything
not
that we
something that can
produce.
be carved in stone and then you can show it for generations. Of course there are recordings of great performers of the past that are like that. It's like David by Michelangelo,
Mhm.
it's just there, and that's your go-to recording for for as long as you live. But for us mortals,
I
there
think
is always
Beverly
the
Sills said that in her whole career, she had 5 performances like that. And the rest of the time, she just did the best she could. 5 performances she can look back on to say that was the way I wanted it. I don't know if all 5 got captured, in recording. I know that sometimes if I've walked off stage thinking that is the way that I wanted to play it, I'm scared to listen to a recording if there is one.
Well, that's coming from somebody like Beverly Seals. It's a very humbling experience. Nowadays, for example, we have all these recordings available of all 24 Caprices by Paganini. I remember, and I'm sure you remember because we're about the same age. Let's not get into that. But when we were growing up, how many recordings were available of all 24 Caprices? It was Pikaisen.
No, I think
Michael Rabin, Itzhak Perelman, and I mean, we are talking about 4, 5, 6, not more than that. Now there are so many of them available, and in one hand, it's great to hear all this talent and to compare all these recordings. Some of them are really inspiring. But I remember this story of Jascha Heifetz that somebody asked him towards the end of his life, how come you never recorded all 24 Caprices by Paganini? You arguably had the best technique out there, technical ability. And he thought for a moment and he said, I never felt ready to do that. Coming from Jascha Heifetz, that's a lot.
Yeah. Isaac Stern saying that, the reason he didn't take up the conductor's baton is that he didn't feel that he knew enough about music, which for a musician of that caliber to feel himself at all inadequate puts...
Our former music director, I feel like I have to say a few words about him, Maestro Heinz Fricke. He was a student of Franz Konvichny, Hermann Abendroth, and Erich Kleiber. So his teachers were
also gods.
Anyone who is anyone knows these names. And he conducted all of his life in Berlin Opera, but Berlin Opera, which was part of socialist part of Germany before Germany was reunited. And because of Iron Curtain, he was not able to travel abroad, and he was not very well known to the Western audiences, to the rest of the world. But he was this amazing conductor, absolutely amazing conductor. He conducted more than 180 operas, not different productions, but 180 operas.
Different,
He often joked with me. He was an older gentleman, and he would look at me and he said, "Can you name 180 operas?" Like,
I can't.
On the spot, I said, "I can't." He said, "I conducted a little more." And when he was in a mood to say something funny, he said, on the other hand, it's very easy to be a conductor. You have to know 2 things. And for the people who heard this for the first time, they would really start listening. He's going to say something important. And the first part was was really important. He said, number 1, you have to know the opera really well. Number 2, you have to remember the downbeat is always down. This way, it's always this way. And that's it. He said, if you remember those 2 things, you're a great conductor. But here comes the piece of trivia, of playing in the opera orchestra. Before I joined this orchestra, I think only once I played an opera when I was doing my master's at Boston University, but never before. And it was difficult in the beginning. And it's not just the sheer length of the production. It's so much that's going on. You're in a pit and there is a conductor and something is going on stage and there is delay in sound. And our Maestro Fricke always said, one eye in the music, the other eye on the conductor. One ear in the orchestra pit, one ear on stage. It's always multitasking, seeing and feeling what's going on around you. Because in a way, it's very, very, distant chamber music experience because the singers are so far away.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and you have to rely on, of course, the conductor to tie everything together. We've talked in other podcasts about the conductor's job. I mean, that kind of being a linchpin of 100 different people, the people in the pit, the people on the stage, the musicians thinking that they heard something, but having to rely on the conductor's beat to make sure that what they think they heard is what is being asked of them. Wait a little bit, the singer's late, the dancer's a little early, whatever. I won't say it's a different set of skills, than playing in a symphony orchestra or than playing solo or chamber music. But there are so many additional skills and considerations.
Yeah, there is
For
so much more to learn and to absorb, and I can tell that in the beginning it wasn't easy for me to play all this new repertoire and all this in this new setting. So I used to really get a score for the opera and my practice part ahead of time and go through at least a couple of different recordings.
Mhm.
And way ahead of time I would mark all the passages and all the spots that I really need to spend time with. And I felt like it was very, very necessary to prepare this way. And I still feel that, for example, when we did the ring cycle, it took a special preparation. I suddenly kind of was reminded of the days when I know maybe the analogy is not going to be the 100% correct one, but when you have, and I'm sure you remember this feeling much better than me because you've done so much more of them, of solo competitions, when you know that this thing is coming up and you need to really start preparing for it. And that's how I started feeling even in the summer before the season when we had the ring cycle. Something major coming up, and I really needed to take it seriously and to start working. And it's not only limiting to just your musical preparation, also your physical preparation.
Yeah, I was going to say you're preparing your
Because
stamina.
the opera lasts, 5.5 hours, and you have to do certain exercises to be physically capable of playing through this long piece.
And it's not something you can cram. That preparation isn't something you can do, you know, a week from before the
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, you have
You
to. You
prepare
have
like
to.
an athlete prepares.
Yeah, if you are determined to finish the production, not to take a sick leave because you suddenly need to see your chiropractor
Oh
uh,
yeah,
or
there
acupuncture
was
therapist.
a wonderful violinist in the Queen Elizabeth competition when I did it, who was heading for the final round right away from the first round, but she was a member of a major symphony orchestra. They had just finished doing a Bruckner cycle. Yeah, and she had been playing tremolo for 2 weeks at a stretch. So her physique gave out. I think she suffered some sort of minor injury. I know that she, was back in the orchestra very quickly, but she suffered some sort of an injury that made it impossible for her to even play the second round of the Queen Elizabeth.
Oh my God.
Um, and the preparation begins not a week before, not a month before, but months plural before, if you're doing something of that high demand.
Yeah, especially when you're a full-time member of the orchestra, you take different ways to prepare for this type of job because this job is very different from this type of work is very different from your solo practicing, from
Oh yeah.
your practicing uh, in your studio. I remember Joseph Silverstein, one of the greatest concertmeisters that ever walked the planet Earth, amazing violinist. In quite a few of his master classes, he mentioned that when he was a concertmeister at the Boston Symphony, he would come to work at least a couple of hours before the performance and practice. And a lot of times people ask him, "Why are you doing this?" And he said that I need to make sure that I'm practicing correctly because some of my correct, quote unquote, violin playing ability is going to be partially lost when I'm playing in the orchestra. And the reason, he would be asked this question, but why is that? And he said, well, when I'm playing in the orchestra, I'm not there to give my stand partner a master class in violin playing. I cannot play louder than my stand
Right.
partner. This is not my job. My job is to blend in. And he said, but when you're trying to blend in, of course, your forte is not going to be your real forte in Brahms' violin concerto. It's going to be a different sort of forte. It's forte, but without playing much louder than your stand partner, because this is not your job to give your stand partner a masterclass.
Yeah.
And that's often what we find out with younger players who join the orchestra. They're still trying to prove something, but this is not the point when you're in a section. In a section, you have to listen to what's going on around you and try to match the rest of the section in sound, in approach, in part of the bow, and little details like that.
You are a part of a greater whole.
Because we were talking about orchestral audition, this is just the first step that grants you a chance to get trial position with the orchestra.
Yeah, well,
And in different orchestras, between 1 and 3 years, you have a trial time.
That's a point
And
that
that's
has been raised. That has been raised in these conversations with members of various orchestras. The length of the trial process varies, and just because you won the audition doesn't mean that you won the spot.
Yes, in our orchestra, it's up to 3 years.
Wow.
Sometimes the tenure is given earlier. Sometimes we have to wait and see, because the player is given the feedback.
How do they absorb the feedback? Yeah, exactly.
Yes. That finally gives you the job.
Zorik, we could talk for hours more, and there are war tales to be told. But we need to wrap this for today, which means that I would very much like to continue this at some other point.
Absolutely.
I would love to talk to you about some of our, competition memories, some of our experiences with, the more student side of things before we get to the whole practical job side of things too. But that's something to look forward to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Emil.
Thank you so much for taking this time with us. And please join, for our listeners, please join us again next week when we are back to Fridays for these podcasts. My guest next week will be Professor Boris Slutsky from Peabody Conservatory at 3 p.m. on Fridays is our regular appointment. And perhaps some weeks or months hence, we can resume this conversation with Maestro Bogachek. Again,
thank you
for
so much
joining us.
Thank you for everything.